everybody. This is Mark Chaffardini with Go See Talk. How are you today? We're excited to invite our next guest, Jermaine Stegall, to the show. He is the amazing composer of Coming to America 2, the Craig Brewer directed sequel to the Eddie Murphy classic. We'll get to his input and more, but enjoy this wonderful trailer.
You must heed my words before I'm gone, my son. Now, you will be king. But the throne must pass to a male heir. Hakim, it appears you have a son. He must be found.
Prepare the royal jet. We are going back to America.
Oh, hell no, Your Majesty.
Come on!
So what you doing back here, Hotel Rwanda?
I'm back! Say it again!
Welcome back to the Go See Talk podcast experience. We are excited to speak to our next guest, composer Jermaine Stegall. He is the man about town, the newest resident and inhabitant of Zamunda. He's also worked with some of the best in the business, and he's well on the way to being a superstar himself. Jermaine, thank you for being on the show. How's things with you in the world of cinematic landscapes?
You're the first person to use the word superstar with my name involved. So far it's good. That's nice. Thank you. So far, yeah, things are good.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're rolling out, and it looks like we're full steam ahead here on Tuesday.
That's great. That's great. I also read in an article that they said conservatively, we probably have another year in this pandemic, maybe a very cautious spring, maybe pessimistic winter, but then by this time next year, we should be great. But all that said, composers tend to spend their time siloed. So how have you been doing this past year? How has it been working in this world? And how has it maybe infected or enhanced your process?
You know, it's interesting. I feel like I've heard the gamut of responses to that as well, in terms of it being, we're used to being alone and, recluse, and I get more work done, and but I only miss people. And it's like, I think at the end of the day, we're not really meant to do life alone, so there's a certain need and pull, no matter what I think when anyone says that, it's only natural for us to be around people in some capacity. And for me, it's definitely affected it. I mean, last summer, being in the thick of scoring Coming to America, we got really up and running around June, July, which was when the pandemic was pretty much raging. And I feel like, somewhere around there was also when Los Angeles was pretty much on fire, literally and figuratively, in terms of the California fires and the Black Lives Matter, not only protests, but riots. It seems like in the midst of that, there's still some people getting shot, and it wasn't, the people weren't sure, the whole thing about the, wearing masks and safety, people were still coming to grips with whether or not it was real. It seemed like a giant mess. And the idea of being creative and all that, I think that was, it had to be obviously a conscious decision to either, digest enough of that to stay informed, so that you're not completely clueless as to what you're supposed to be doing in terms of public safety, but then also the idea of having an endless well of creativity and addressing notes and telling a story that not only is cohesive, but funny in the midst of all this stuff, and warm, and, having heart, and in some cases romantic, it seems like a complete contrast to what's going on outside last summer. So it was a challenge. And I think, now that it's coming out, we could finally, enjoy some of the rewards of being focused during that time. But it affected me. Yes, for sure. To answer your question, it affected me.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha. Well, you mentioned heart a little while ago, and that's exactly what Craig Brewer's known for. Coming from, this is Coming to America is a very family-friendly movie. It's rated down from R from the previous one, the '88 release, but Dolomite Is My Name was a hard R, but that still managed to have a
Yeah,
lot of heart. And I think that Coming to America had equal amounts. What
yeah.
were some of this first discussions? What did Craig want? What did you think was right? How involved was Eddie? Some of
You
these.
know what? One thing I remember Craig asking me when I first started was, not even when I first started, when we first met, the first meeting was like, what does coming to America mean to you? When we talked about kind of both being people that grew up on the material. I mean, I was about 11 when the original came out. And in terms of the hard R, I think, there's a lot of, the first cut I saw of this was 3.5 hours long. So there was just a lot of ideas, that we had. And, we're trying to figure out what is the most effective story. Some of the elements that lean towards rating this a hard R weren't working as well with the story we were going to end up telling. So, it ended up with that PG-13 vibe. And I think through and through, like the idea of this being a very Craig Brewer movie, it's funny, like just being around him and, seeing all the challenges that are coming his way on a movie like this, being on set with him, talking on set after everyone's going home and shooting and, feeling like, okay, it's nearing midnight, 1 a.m. He has to be here at 6. And now we got to talk about things that need to happen, musically speaking, on camera. He had this vibe of just being understanding. It was just honestly a really good fit in terms of working under the constraints of all the different ideas that were being thrown out. There was just so many ideas. I mean, it's coming to America, so like everybody's got something that they hope we can squeeze into it. And when I first met him, it was funny because his first film, he was mentored by John Singleton, who ended up helping produce a Hustle and Flow, which is his first, his breakout movie. And I told him that my wife and I, when we rented that movie back in, I don't even know what, 2006 or 8 or whenever it came out, like the catchphrase for like a week around the house was "whoop that trick." It was just like this fun thing that we talked about stories about that stuff. It was just fun to be talking and working with someone who had created an element of pop culture, you know what I mean? So it's like it seemed like he would be the perfect person to handle some sensitively material that is important to pop culture,
Mhm.
so yeah, Eddie was involved as well to answer that question. Um, I was able to meet him, on set during one of our interactions that had specifically to do with one of our on-camera music needs. And to my understanding, with everyone around Eddie's camp, he loves music. It means so much to him. He actually talks about it quite a bit. I mean, some of us are old enough to enjoy and like reflect happily on his studio moment with the Party on the Time single, which I happily bought on cassette as a single. When people used to buy singles on cassette, like that was a whole situation. Um, but I know that he was pretty involved and watched everything with a fine tooth comb in terms of making sure, whether it be music or costumes, lighting, editing, that everything was in line with the actual story that he created. These are all his characters. So for me, it meant a lot to know that he was in approval the entire time that we were submitting music and coming up with ideas to solve story problems with music. I won't say problems, but scenarios. I'll put it
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Puzzles. That's what you
Yeah,
do.
puzzles.
Speaking of singles, I actually bought the Eddie Murphy Ojaja, the I don't know if it's called
Oh,
Jamaican. He's this sort of like a Bob Marley type song. It's called Ojaja.
oh yeah.
Really good. And
Uh-huh.
it's like once you hear it, you go, why isn't he doing more of this? But
I mean, he loves it. He loves it. And I think that he's even said that, he's felt like, it's almost therapeutic. He has to do something with music and be hands-on. But the idea of having a whole other career, like, oh my gosh, that's a whole situation.
well, the movie is shorter actually than the original runtime of the first one by about
Mhm.
20 or so minutes. And I noticed that the scenes were even chopped up and they felt more concise. The
Uh,
opening
uh-huh.
sweep through the landscape was a lot quicker than the last one, and there was a lot of music in moments where probably the first one wouldn't. So, what
Uh-huh.
kind of spotting discussions did you have? How much did Craig, drive you or maybe pull you back?
Well, one thing is that's interesting is, I mean, first of all, the movie, this is I've even heard Eddie say that he felt like this is a much better it's a better made movie than the first one. I mean, the first movie, it worked its way into pop culture in its own kind of cult movie way where people just, it'd play on cable, and everyone that I talked to, everyone that I told that I was going to be doing this movie, when I first got the job, their response was, I was just watching that movie last week, the original. It's one of these things that when it's on, for me, that movie is Back to the Future. When it's on, you just let it play. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? There's no excuse to stop the movie. You leave the TV going if you have to leave the house. It cannot be stopped. And Coming to America is one of those, similar movies where, there's just, the story, just made all these one-liners just so appropriate, that you can tell that, move the story forward with all these little bits and pieces. And with the tightness of Coming to America, it's really about making sure we had a film that worked well on its own as well. I mean, if you've seen the first one, I mean, it's just icing on the cake to know all the other subtle jokes. And actually look at the set. It's funny, I visited the set where, in our Coming to America, all the celebrations take place, and it's basically the same set from the first movie. I mean, our set is lived on Tyler Perry Studios, which is different than the first movie. But when you look at it, if you pause both movies, like, you see all the different things that I was like, did they add this? This is actually, it's very, consistent with that. And the barbershop, these are all things that, they feel very similar in terms of
Hmm.
spotting. Part of how I actually got the job was, the opening sequence. And it's funny that you said it's much shorter. It was about 4 minutes when I first saw
Oh,
it.
really?
So
Okay.
so and I had to obviously have music to accompany a lot of that. But um uh I what I did was kind of in the vein of the original, referencing the Mbube song that basically in the first movie is sung a cappella with some a cappella chants and some a cappella improvisation and some African vocal noises and sounds and things. But I thought, at the end of the day, what if we, first of all, this movie to me was always a celebration of the legacy of Coming to America, right? So what if we do that, but times 10? Like, have full orchestra, let's have percussion, let's have harp, let's have everything on top of that, and just really say that, just to me, it's a statement about, number one, solidifying to the audience that yes, we actually are, as it's been talked about, but we are actually going back to Zamunda right now. And boy, are we happy to be there. So, the idea of having energy, all these things, I have some text that's sung slash chanted that you hear in the very first couple of measures that says Ikabo Si Elewa, which is Yoruba, which is a West African language. If you translate that to English, it actually means welcome to the motherland. So it's one of those things you might not recognize on its first viewing, but hopefully, I know that this movie, the original, was a big deal to folks in Africa, seeing their continent represented so well on the map back in the 80s, when that wasn't a popular thing to do. It's like have an all black cast with a story where, this black culture is empowered and coming from a place of prominence and wealth and abundance. um so I thought it was give some nods to that culture as well. It would be a fun thing. But yeah.
No, I think that's great, and the flourishes you gave the score are fantastic. And the one of the things that I learned about reading about your bio is that you have a penchant for choral music, gospel music. How did that influence some of the dance routines or the singing and the
Oh,
vocals in this?
tons. I mean, partially how I worked with the vocalists, how I wrote for them, I mocked all the vocals up myself. meaning, pretty much every vocal note that you hear, whether it be male, female, contrabass, like I sung every part in because I wanted to be very specific about the style and the inflections and how I wanted the vocalist to interpret the notes that they were seeing on the page when we actually recorded. And our very first recording session with vocals, we ended up working with Jason White, who is the conductor of Kanye West's Sunday Service Choir. And of course, he pulled a few members from that into our session that we did at Capitol Records right before they started shooting the movie. So he was heavily involved in helping us get vocals on our main title opening sequence because we had some on-camera needs where we would see a choir on screen. And then we had another session at Sunset Sound a few weeks after that where there was even more music needed on camera for when I was going to fly back to set and supervise some other moments where there's either choir being worked with and or just things that were chanted or sung that needed to dictate the pace of how it was shot. And again in the studio, like I was able to say kind of like this choir, or think like South Side of Chicago or Ricky Dillard, I need a wide vibrato, or for this one I want you to think Negro spiritual, all kinds of things that I enjoy listening to casually, being able to speak that language with them. And a lot of these people, they grew up singing in churches, all their life really. And with our organist, we Reverend Brown makes a appearance in this movie, as you well know. I pretty much dictated this amazing organist Eddie Brown. It's funny, we joked about Eddie Brown playing for Reverend Brown, so I called him Reverend Brown while we were recording. But he plays at this amazing church, West Angeles Church of God in Christ, where a lot of folks go to get this super old school, high energy church, gospel music. He and I went into a church, just the two of us, because we recorded I think in July of last year. Again, the pandemic was raging. And I was like, let's just go to church. And he was like, there's a very specific church. It's not at the church that I play at, but there's something about this organ. I mean, it speaks in a way that you just can't, you can't beat it. So I tracked down to a church near Inglewood, and I had no idea where I was, but I'm like, we're getting the heart and soul of Coming to America right now. And I showed him the scenes, and I really just told him what to play. And in some of the cases, it would be like one take, and he did exactly what I needed. And that's what's in the movie. You know what I mean? It wasn't like a lot of notes. Maybe he could do a little bit more like this. Folks heard it, and it just worked. It's so much part of the style and the culture. The gospel thing, like, I feel like this movie allowed me to and forced me to do everything that I've ever done musically. Like, it was the only way to get through it. Like, whether it be working with jazz bands, working with gospel choirs, writing in the sweeping style, the swashbuckling style, whether there's action, chase music, romantic music, my interest in love and embracing of R&B. Like, this is one of those things you can't really, it's hard to Swiss Army knife and literally single-handedly actually do all the styles in an authentic way, as opposed to really, really expanding in a way that's outside my comfort zone. It's, these are all things that I really enjoyed, doing.
Well, picking up on that, I may know the answer before I ask this, but if you liken making
Mhm.
music to, say, cooking a recipe, there's coming up with your list, which is maybe like the concept phase, the mixing and the cooking, and then there's the plating the food. So
Mhm.
what gives you the most excitement? Is it the coming up with ideas? Is it working with the musicians, or just sitting back and going, yeah.
One exciting part for me is when I start to see, when we get to the point of copying parts, and I feel like a session is about to happen, and everyone's like, when it comes to copying parts for the orchestra, where the strings, the brass, the harp, percussion, vocals, I have to go over all those parts as they're being copied, and I start seeing those PDFs, and I realize, and look, there was a pandemic going on, so we couldn't really get the entire orchestra together at one time. We had to, like I said, with our remote recordings, we had to do harp, bass, drums, guitar, our remaining vocals for our 5 vocalists had to be recorded at home. Our woodwind, our feature woodwind player Pedro Ustash had to play at home as well. There's all these elements that had to be at home, and then our strings had to be recorded on one day, brass on another, COVID test. But the idea for everyone like that attended the session, like this is all things like protocols, like 15 minutes of COVID instructions had to be given out. But the fact that we're all at least for our string day, which is our day where we got 40 string players
Wow.
together, that knowing that a giant group of people are going to be assembled and we're going to come together for a common purpose to play the same note on the same cue and the same page and be doing a thing that was very, unified. That's an exciting realization that it's wrapping up. The score is generally one of the last things to be added to the film. In my case, I was working on it, at the script stage right before they were shooting, but as we're putting the final pieces together to make it feel like, it looks like a house, and it's not just like, our 2x4s and the roof. We actually start to see walls and grass, and the sprinklers are in, like it's all starting to fit together, like, oh, someone can actually live here and watch this thing. That's the exciting realization for me when I start to see those PDFs and we're about to go in the studio. It's so exciting.
Well, when you use a house metaphor, that sounds a little bit like William Ross talking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I remember talking to him before he did one of the Oscar events or the
Uh,
Academy Award events. And I'm in architecture. I do this as a hobby.
oh,
And
okay.
so we were just talking, and he likes to talk to his clients about, well, I forget exactly what he said, but if you
Well,
want,
one thing he was saying when you're doing the mock-ups, that's the paper plates, and we're recording with musicians. Now we're bringing out the fine china. That's what I heard him say at least 3 times during this process. So yeah, having him involved in, was obviously one of those situations where I felt like I kind of want to, some in some ways being to be mentored by someone, the opportunity to just hire them and to have them work with you is, one of the best things you can do, and just like see how they talk to the orchestra, see what their demeanor is, see how they get, results, and suggest things and see how they respond to the suggestion. If he says something like, that sounds great, that's exactly what I was thinking, then you're like, wow, like I think I'm actually absorbing the things I've been listening to Bill Ross for all these years.
not a bad guy to learn from. I mean, he's
Not
worked
a
with
bad guy at all.
Silvestri and Williams, and
Oh, I
you've
mean,
met John Williams, haven't you?
I've met him. That's actually a funny story. I'll circle back to that, but there was a funny moment that I remembered when we were in the studio, in between takes of, actually before we recorded our first cue for Coming to America, and Bill Ross, so Dennis Sands was our engineer for this movie, and I was telling them, where Alan Silvestri's name came up. He's obviously a hero of everybody's. Who, I mean, you'd be crazy not to have him be a hero. And I mentioned to him, when my son was born, we have 2 kids, they're 7 and 8. And I've made what I call film music sleep CDs for both of them to help them sleep. And the first track on that is track 1 of the opening of Father the Bride 2, which Alan Silvestri wrote. And I was like, wait a minute, Bill, he was like, yeah, I worked on that. And I was like, Dennis, did you record that? It's kind of a fun moment to be like in the studio working on a movie with the guys that my son has been listening to a cue of theirs for the last 8 years of his life every single night. And he was like, oh, that's a nice little, it's like, we should do this again, right? We're all already family. You guys don't even know it. But yeah, my John Williams story is one that, I heard he was going to be at USC one day, and oh my gosh, it was like one of those things. It was a year after I graduated from USC in 2005. He was addressing the graduating class, and I felt like he's unattainable. I'm going for it. Like he's going to have 50,000 security with him and all this stuff, but this is happening. You know what I mean? Got to be subtle. And so I go, of course, my wife makes sure I take my demo CD with me. And I had a copy of the vinyl. Fitzwillie is a score that he did in like 1959 or something like that. I was like, I don't know what I want him to sign. I just need to go there with all this stuff. And there's a point where he was about to get on an elevator after his speech, and I was like, how do I get his attention? He's like 7 people. And I just say, Mr. Williams. He turns around slowly. I'm like, oh, he's gonna look at me. He's gonna look at me. This is amazing. That's all I need. And he's like, yes. And I was like, hey. And I introduced myself. I just interrupted everyone. I was like, I went here last year. He's like, oh, by the way, can I get a picture? And so he says, sure. And I put down all these things I have. I'm carrying all this stuff. And I pull out my camera. I must have been $50 in nickels, dimes, quarters, Target receipts, tissue papers, all falls on the floor, and it's like going jingling and making all this noise. And we take the picture. It's like no one knows how much stuff was going on behind the scenes when that happened. But I hope I can meet him again in under other circumstances, where it's not so nervous. But that guy, for me, he's always been the model, and it allowed me to, in a movie like this, really express a certain level of range. You know what I mean? To show, it's not just, and I've heard many people say, like, it sounds like, when they don't know my music, that this composer was influenced by John Williams. It doesn't sound like a copy, but it sounds like I could see that, and that's all, I could really ask for, is to show the influence, yeah.
Well, he's got infinite charm. I mean, there's just something that's inherent in him that makes good music. And what I was going to say about Coming to America is that there's a charm that there's a couple times where it felt that I'm not going to say it felt John Williams, but it felt like that same heartstring was being plucked. So
heartstring. That's a great term. I mean, another thing that you're asking, Craig, mentioning in terms of spotting and in terms of the way we talk about, like, he mentioned that in the first movie, Akeem, Eddie Murphy's character, is extremely compassionate, right? So he's constantly thinking about his feelings, he's thinking about how other people feel, and he's trying to, he's apologetic at times, he's supportive at times, and really the score has to reflect that as well, because in this movie there's a moment where he realizes, and that's the whole point of the story, is that he realizes that his newfound son is doing the exact same thing that he was doing in the first movie. So the idea of romantic interest really being at the heart of this thing, and the heart of one person being able to experience, finding their own true love for themselves, and at a pace that's not forced, that really is the heart behind it. So, for me, you're talking about charm. I knew that it was very, very important to get our Rose Garden scene right, where Lavelle and Mirembe's characters start to really get, see what's going on under the hood, inside their brains. They've, Lavelle's had his bath, right? He's gone through that. They've had their little back and forth. In terms of, just becoming friends, but when they really start to know each other as people, and they're talking about Zamundan culture and American culture and pop movies in America and remakes, and getting to know each other, then there's a moment where, and that scene is like 4 minutes long. I think it was actually twice as long in our first cut. Of course, everything was. But, it was just a moment where we can really let the audience take their time and not feel forced or rushed in terms of the natural progression of courting, and it's like, you think of things like that, it's very purposeful, but it's subtle. You know what I mean? People don't understand. There's a certain level of human nature that plays into all this stuff. And if you really get it right, that's why certain melodies have more impact when the melody or the composer understands the heart behind what the story is trying to say. Like, for instance, in E.T., like the construction of that melody when he's flying is that the melody, like, before we write a note, the melody has to ascend because the character is flying, right? So the first, whatever versions John Williams was writing of that melody, they all have to do with for him to really get that scene right, going upward more and more and more and more, da 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 da, you don't end until you get your highest part of the melody. So with that one, it was for me, it was all about marimbas, glass marimbas, wooden marimbas, African marimbas, bass marimbas, xylophone, vibraphone, celeste, harp, all the keyboard instruments. I wanted to feel like a blanket of warm African romance, just surrounding, the audience. In my mind, this was going to play in theaters, so I wanted all these elements and all the different speakers just surrounding us when we're enjoying that. Hopefully, folks that watch us on Amazon Prime all have 5.1 set up at home. I mean, I don't know, during quarantine. But that's interesting.
Well, no, that's a really good thing because I think because of this, I haven't really thought of a theater experience in a while. So just the
Mhm.
idea of planning for, film being a medium, it's all about its presentation. So whether
Yeah,
it's a phone, a TV, a theater, it can have different impact on the audience. I saw Tenant during quarantine, but I
yeah.
just didn't think about Coming to America in
I
because
man, I couldn't stop thinking when I watched Tenet about all the work that went into that score being a sonic experience. Now, I let my wife hear one of our Coming to America cues as a preview, just one cue, and she took the headphones off and said, "We're gonna need a bigger TV." I'm like, "Of course!" Like this is a whole situation. So in December, we went and got 5.1 so that when it came out, we weren't scrambling with trying to get our surround situation happening in our home, so we can actually hear it the way it was intended in our home. Um, but watching Tenet and at home, I just felt so thankful that we had set that up beforehand, because I mean, we would have missed so many things. I mean, as much time as we spend even with Coming to America, making sure things are prominently placed in different parts of the spectrum, or spatial field. Um, I felt like, I can't expect everyone to run out and do this, but we got to at least think about it. And if, for us, like if we show anyone that comes over, like um it has to feel like I've always heard Hans Zimmer say that when people buy the CD or whatever, they're only hearing half the score. And I was like, oh, beggars can be choosy. This guy's like, of course everything's in surround, but I'm like, oh yeah, he's totally right. He's absolutely right. We're missing half of the stuff that we spend so much time on the mix stage trying to dial in.
Well, let's go back to the crescendo because I think that the ET crescendo, because I think that as a composer, everybody wants that heroic moment, everybody wants something memorable. But did you ever imagine that the flip side of that would happen to you, to where you're building a crescendo towards a tiny golden triangle? It's like the inverse.
You know what? I didn't think about that. That was that was a fun moment. That I mean, it was a very 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 infinitely fun main title. Just like I said, the opening originally was super 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 long. They're walking down the hallway this way. They're walking down the hall. There's more roses, more roses, more
Mhm.
roses, more roses. They're walking down. They go through another door. It was like, this movie is gonna be so epic. When did they get there? That was really made it epic. That build to that triangle. But a producer, Kevin Misher, actually suggested that, and I thought, oh, this is gonna be fun. We slow the whole orchestra down, like everyone's waiting for Coming to America to start, and ding. It's like, how perfect is that?
Yeah,
It was a nice nod.
yeah.
That
And
was fun.
nice touch to the movie to really send it off and let you know kind of what you're getting into. And
Oh yeah, what you're getting into.
yeah. And to have Paul Bates of all people do it. I mean,
Oh
because
yeah,
everybody remembers She's Your Queen, and
yes.
so
I mean, and he gets the opportunity to, have another shining moment. He has to do, he has to
yeah.
do something in this one. But yeah, having him back, I think that I was just watching, I think Jimmy Kimmel last night. He said that he was the only actor that I don't think that Eddie has actually come in contact with since the filming of the first Coming to America. Pretty much everyone else at some point or another is, circled back. But even getting one of our main rose bearer, her back in the opening sequence. It's like everyone that we could, bring back, it just added to the pile of fun.
Sure. And not conversely, similarly, I think that's what helped make the Cobra Kai show so impactful, because
Yeah.
they were able to bring everybody back, and
Uh-huh.
over the seasons bring back more people. So this really did feel like a homecoming. So this
Uh-huh.
was a great endeavor.
Oh.
Kind of a geeky question, but I'm always curious about source music in the
Mm.
film. There's a training sequence in the beginning
Mhm.
where Eddie and his daughters are learning to fight bow staffs, and there's
Yep.
a couple percussionists playing.
Yep.
So, do you hire actual percussionists? Are they
Oh,
actors? And then similarly, you've got three big musical acts from the '80s who make an
yeah.
appearance in the
Yeah,
film.
that was a good. Yeah, this was a good, it was a good question. Like it's funny. I was just saying yesterday that I mean, this is like when I say immersive process, like they actually had me involved in the casting of some of the actors that actually have musical responsibilities on screen, and as well as the costuming in some cases. Like I feel like I collaborated with Ruth Carter, our Oscar
Oh, no
winning
way.
costume designer, who just got a star on the Walk of Fame last week, by the way.
I saw that. Yeah.
They were asking me, are there things that are musically speaking, that can complement the African culture that they can put on? So I don't know if it's actually, any of the close-ups show up, but I had them suggested wearing these African ankle bracelets and things that actually make sound. Because like even if we don't hear it while we're filming, the fact that they would be wearing it is something that would help the authenticity of the story.
Hmm.
And when I got to set the very, very, very first day, and to me obviously this is seeming like a larger than life moment, and our location for the royal palace, the is actually shot at Rick Ross's house. So to be driving onto Rick Ross's giant mansion in Atlanta, coming out to see the set where all the actors are. And when I put my bag down, they're like, Jermaine, welcome. Okay, so those percussionists over there, we want you to go over there and talk to them, tell them what you want them to do, how do you want them to play, where you want them to look, if you like their movements. And I'm like, I just got here. I'm the new guy, but I guess they're like, no, go. This is where this is happening. So, yeah, I mean, they hired real percussionists, for that stuff. And what I did was, again, for that, created these specific rhythms that I wanted them to play, and we did it in sections. And the way they had it, they did a whole mock-up of a fight choreography simulation where there was these stunt choreographers fighting. They choreographed the actual fight that the actors were going to do later. So I basically ended up in 4 or 5 different clips, I think it was, basically scored loops that were complementary to that action sequence. So when we got there, it would be like play sequence number 1 to a click, and it was super crazy loud outside. And I was like, we are making, it was the first realization, we are really making a movie here, aren't we? I guess that's happening. But so we were able to get choreographed starts and stops, and then they can actually be in sync, playing the same rhythms together. That's what we really needed visually on camera. So and it's much, 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 much harder to do that when the folks are just actors and not musicians. So that was some source material that I was able to happily and joyfully write. I love writing music where it's just percussion. The dance sequences as well. Fatima Robinson was our dance choreographer. I also, collaborated, with her solely at a certain point. Craig's instruction, at a certain point was literally, you guys run with it. And it was like, we get to do this. Like, and we were going back and forth, and she was sending me all these videos of just the dance sequence. I mean, there's a certain point where the dance sequence was going to be 2 minutes long. In this current cut, it's about 30 seconds, 25 seconds. And we had all these different sections, and she rehearsed with live percussionists in her dance routine as well. And we would go back and forth with not only her and her choreography team, but then her percussionists. We would send files back and forth, and they would make adjustments. And I would have little hits, interjected where that would hopefully accentuate something that they can choreograph to. And then when we got to set, even Randy Spinlove, the head of music at Paramount, was saying that having me on set during that, I mean, they shot that dance sequence for like 4 days, right? So being able to on the spot be with the choreographers and talk about how many more measures we needed or where they wanted hits, and we can like go and edit those things, like literally be on set, everyone's in costume ready to shoot, make those changes on set, and then have seamless takes and have her say, oh yeah, by the way, we changed one thing, we added one thing, we need a hit here. And I would say, okay, look at 30 seconds or whatever, and then grab that and then put that there and really literally make the movie, on the spot. There was also another moment where we have, I think, a chamber ensemble of African musicians that are kind of pan-African. So we have a kora played, which is this giant stringed instrument. We have some African flutes and hand percussion and things. Similarly, like I created about 4 or 5 tracks that were coronation music for once. Prince Lavelle achieves his princely task. That there's going to be a celebration, that he's now announced as Prince, and there's going to be celebration music, and there's going to be an authentic ensemble on stage. I had to go and talk to them about, in some cases, I mean, they're more musician than actor, so they were thinking, okay, I'm not really playing, so why do I have to be emphatic? It's like, no, I need to go. You're like, Jermaine, yeah, okay, got it. So, okay, you need to take a breath, actually make some air, even though you're not making sound, so that it looks like they're actually playing. It's like, we know they can play, they know they can play, but the people at home that know nothing about this, it just needs to be seamless. So like, there's so many elements of, not in hindsight, the source music that I was very involved in, that, composers normally don't get to. Like you said, there's so much music in this. They needed a little bit of everything you can possibly think of.
And to that point, there's 3 big musical acts from the 80s in a very important scene in the beginning. Did you get involved with those 3 acts? Did you help kind of change some of the the verses that they sang?
So I was able to be in the studio with In Vogue, who was involved. I didn't change anything with them, but Prince Lavelle's musical number, uh, we did a source connect where he was performing his part, where they're singing the song "Get Off," and I basically, gave him advice on how to sound. How to say sound more like Prince, like I, can tell him. But it's actually him singing on the recording, so we wanted to, have someone that had, a good opinion. I mean, I love Prince so much. I mean, I can go on and on all day long about just that one song, "Get Off." Gladys Knight's performance, was a moment where we were on set and she requested, over the microphone, Gladys Knight is requesting that the composer come and rehearse with her. It was like, here we go, right? Here, I guess that's what I'm here for. Like, no pressure at all, right? So not only did we do a source connect, but we worked on recording her vocals as well, but ended up being able to rehearse with her on set, because during the session, she lives in Vegas and they did the session there. We were in here in LA, but was able to be in touch with her. There's a funny moment towards the end of the film. The song "To Be Loved" is very, 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 very significant with the first movie. I guess I could say that it was originally meant to be a situation where it wasn't like it was before. We were going to have Akeem's character sing the song at a certain point when he's, apologizing to Lisa for all the things that he's done wrong. But when we were on set, literally, it was one of those situations where it just changed at the drop of a hat. Like, it's like, for some reason, guess what? We're not doing that plan. Jermaine, go. It's like, okay, here we are again. I guess that's why we're here, right? And it suggested that we have our choir sing, and so I'm literally summoned to go and rehearse with the choir. I have a very quick auditioning process, which is, who here knows all of the words to the original "To Be Loved"? One person raises their hand. You're our soloist. All right, here's what we're gonna do. And we shoot that scene in a way that hadn't been planned originally, and you know, hearing Eddie talk about it, I remember hearing him talk about it around December of 2019 in certain interviews, that he didn't say what scene it was, but I knew what he was talking about. That there's something that it wasn't originally planned, but it turned out way more beautiful and impactful for the story, um, than it originally was intended. And I think that, you know, there's certain moments of genius that he has where everyone else is confused, and their heads are spinning because we're not doing the original plan, right? Like kind of like the pandemic, you know, everyone's going crazy, and his wheels are churning about what is the most effective way to tell this story, you know. And for us, it had to do with making a severe change where everyone, you know, all of a sudden the extras are in the movie, you know, they're there for something else, and now they're going to be a part of a whole other scene. So um yeah, it was a long-winded answer of asking. I mean, there's so much music in this movie. Like there was so many needs of every single kind, including source music for me to figure out.
Well, it just shows that you're very adept at thinking on your feet. You know, if the entire plan goes sixes and sevens or whatever
Yeah,
British, you're
yeah,
able to deal with it and move
uh,
on. And one of the things I was going to ask you is a lot of times when you start something as a composer, you're asked to emulate somebody's style
mm,
or mimic this or give your impression. Sometimes it's a daunting task, and sometimes you get the courage by doing the thing first, and you get the courage after. So
absolutely. There was, I mean, there was no time. I was like, okay, literally everybody's in costume on set looking at it. It's like there's an issue and the composer's name comes up. Like the one thing you want to do is have that area be smooth, you know, all of a sudden, you know, because then it's like everyone's looking at me as if it was my idea to change it, you know.
mm. And do you think that you could have done that maybe 10 years ago? Was there a film you did or a project that you felt turned a corner for you and you now you think to yourself, "Hey, this guy's good."
You know what? I don't know. I mean, I don't think 10 years ago, I think I would have been like, well, they said this and we can't do that because that's not our original plan. That would have been probably been my response, as opposed to like, for instance, you know, in the indie world, you know, you have all these restrictions, you know, they're mostly financial. But you're constantly told about, you know, things that you can't do. And if you really want to do the thing, then you figure out a way to get it done, or you know, or you complain. You know, it's like, what do? You know, you complain and you wallow in this thing and you stay stuck, or do you actually do something and finish the thing so that you can move on to the next thing and, you know, kind of enjoy life and not, you know, lose so much sleep, because we're all going to lose a little bit of sleep here, but lose so much sleep over the little stuff, you know. At the end
Sure.
of the day, we're making a movie. It's not like a it's not a personal project. It's not an album. You know, I don't expect the score album to go diamond or anything. You know what I mean? Platinum. You know, it's not about that stuff. You know, I enjoy music, and so that's a part of this process. And to be honest, I think when everyone was realizing that, it helped everything go smoother in terms of, oh, you know what, we can try this, and if it doesn't work, it's not like Jermaine all of a sudden thinks he's being treated unfairly because they're asked to make a change. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
like, oh wait, let's make a movie here. Let's have some fun, you know.
So if we can loop your family into it for a second, Eddie's movies, cater to all audiences. There's music out there for all ages and audiences. What are some of the first musical albums or artists you've introduced to your kids? And what are some of the first, what's your three Eddie movies that you're going to show your kids?
Well, first of all, I have to say that there are two instances where I was able to actually loop my kids into. I had to, whether they can watch this whole movie or not. I think I can actually pause and or fast forward certain scenes from this movie to show them, because they got to know what Daddy was doing for a year and a half. But having them sing on a couple of things, where there was a moment where I had some African chanting where there's a moment where Eddie is at dinner with the family. You know, Lavelle and his mom come to dinner in Zamunda and they're eating, um, and the camera's kind of pushing in closely on his face, and he's freaking out about the fact that this is not going well. Then you hear kind of you know, I had my kids in the studio making these sounds. That's a sound that we also use later when Prince Lavelle is cut the whiskers, and he holds them up over his hand. And right before you hear the words "Ikabo Siele" chanted and screamed loudly, you also hear that, you know, sung loudly and prominently, so that they know. Like, it's not like, "Ah, I think I heard it." It's like, no, no, no. It needs to be forefront. Either it works or it doesn't. You know,
Yeah.
my son, when I got the when I bought them, or when I bought the movie, when I got the job, I bought Coming to America in my Apple account, so it can be on my phone, iPad, screens, all the Apple TVs, whenever I needed to access it quickly. And for whatever reason, we didn't have the restrictions set up. So he came into our room after seeing, it was the first 5 minutes, and he said, "Mommy, I think I'm in trouble." I was like, "What happened?" You know, there's a whole nude bather scene. Because they know that I've been working on this movie, and they knew even back then, but I think we had watched, Dr. Doolittle and some, Shrek. So they started to know Eddie Murphy's name. I thought, look, this is a name that's going to be important to them to know that I did this thing, this icon. Later, when they're older, so I think when they saw the poster, they thought, "Oh yeah, I can click on that. It has something to do with Daddy." So moving forward, I think I'm gonna burn through the entire Doctor Doolittle series, and make sure we plow through all that stuff that is a little bit more appropriate for. I mean, I don't think they've seen the Norbit stuff, but he's got plenty out there for the kids.
Certainly does. Certainly does. Yeah, I'm excited to show my daughter Nutty Professor. That's one of my go-tos,
Oh yes,
and I like Dr. Doolittle too. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So
yeah, yeah.
little sequence with the rats. When he
Oh
goes,
yeah.
he goes, "What's star? What's rat spelled backwards? Star." He goes, "What's ha spelled backwards?" And he drops him. Ah, exactly.
Right.
Anyway.
Exactly.
Well, I guess if we can wrap up with maybe telling us how your what's next on your plate, if you can announce a couple titles or maybe personal project. What's going on in your world?
Personal projects right now. I guess it's not personal. It's a supernatural thriller that I'm working on for Universal right now. Can't say the name of it, but it's super exciting. Starring Heather Graham for Will Packer Productions. It's very exciting to finally work with those guys. I can say to you that it's going to be a complete 180 from all the romance and comedy that we've been dealing with, and much more along the lines of scary and something that I could never watch alone. Sure, probably be out this fall, around a certain time where those things tend to happen. We'll see if it has a theatrical situation in terms of the pandemic and the numbers letting up, but there's a couple other things in the works that again is like everything's hush hush right now. Right now in that vein, but I can say it's an exciting time, that I thought would happen, but I'm telling you, this pandemic has really thrown everyone for a loop. Like the idea of what we can count on being next, and like what's being said as being next, and then it's like kind of on hold, but it's happening at the same time. So I think we're all looking forward to a safer situation so that we can uh, get back to enjoying things in a way that's more fulfilling, whether that's having a communal viewing experience or whether it be the concert going experience, whatever it is. um, I'm looking forward to, as far as what's next, experiencing this stuff with people. um, it's the best way.
In 5.1 at the very minimum.
5 to 7.
7 to 9
Yeah,
and a half. We'll figure
whatever
it
you got. Do what you can.
Jermaine, it's been a pleasure, man. It's been good catching up with you. All the best.
Yeah, thank you.